I opened my eyes and realized the sun was gone. Above me pressed the weight of an ocean, endless and suffocating, its shadows rippling like a sky made of water. Around me, towers rose high, sealed beneath a giant dome, their glass walls glinting with the faint light that filtered through the sea. For a second, I thought it was a dream, a nightmare I'd wake from. But then I heard the silence of the streets, the way people moved without looking at one another, their gray clothes blending into the colorless city. It wasn't survival, it was control. We thought the domes were sanctuaries, shelters built to protect what was left of humanity after the floods. But the deeper we went, the more it felt like a cage, and some cages are guarded from the inside. We didn't know it yet, but one of us had already chosen a side. Subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you is the part of history they never wanted anyone to survive long enough to share. It started like any other night. 4 of us gathered on the coast, drinking, joking, talking about everything and nothing. The sea stretched out in front of us, calm and endless, a black mirror reflecting the stars. We didn't know it would be the last night we would ever see the world we recognized. The ground shuddered first. At first it felt like a mild tremor, the kind that makes you laugh nervously and look around for reassurance. But then the sand under our feet began to ripple, as if the beach itself were breathing. Bottles tipped over. The sound came next, a low metallic roar that didn't belong to the earth or sky. It was mechanical, deliberate, and it grew louder until it swallowed the night. The tide retreated suddenly, exposing jagged rocks and wet sand as far as we could see. "Tsunami," Sarah whispered, her face pale. But no wave came. Instead, the sea rose like a wall, a dark, vertical slab of water, higher than any building, blotting out the horizon. Inside that wall, we saw movement. Shapes. Enormous shadows, gliding upward through the water, too symmetrical to be natural. Machines, not animals. Their outlines glinted faintly, like metal catching starlight. "Run!" Mark shouted, but there was nowhere to run. The last thing I saw before the water collapsed over us was Daniel, his eyes fixed on the wall, not with fear, but something else. Something unreadable. Then darkness. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on a cold surface. My lungs burned, yet I could breathe. The air was thick and metallic. My vision cleared, and what I saw stole the breath I had left. We were no longer on the beach. Around us rose skyscrapers, not ruins, but functioning towers, sealed beneath a translucent dome. Above the dome pressed the ocean itself, a ceiling of shifting blue and black, schools of fish gliding where clouds should have been. The city was alive, but wrong. People moved in silence, wearing the same dull gray clothes. They walked past each other without a word, without a glance. Their faces were empty, drained of anything human. Sarah clutched my arm. This isn't real. It can't be. But it was real. Every shadow, every breath told us this wasn't a dream. Mark tried to approach a passerby, but the man pulled away immediately, his eyes darting like a startled animal. No one wanted to speak to us. No one even wanted to look at us. And then, for the briefest moment, one man did. His gaze locked onto mine, his lips barely moving as he whispered, "You don't belong here." A chill spread through me. We were alive, but this world wasn't waiting for us. It wasn't ready to welcome us. And as I looked at Daniel, his expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on something none of us could see, I felt the first flicker of suspicion I couldn't name. That was the moment we understood. We were not supposed to be here. At first, the city seemed alive. Lights glowed softly in the streets. Neon signs flickered above old shop fronts, and crowds moved with mechanical precision. But the longer we walked, the more wrong it felt, as though everything was a copy of life rather than life itself. The buildings triggered memories. A cafe on the corner reminded me of one we'd sat in back home. The arched frame of a theater looked like one in our own city, but nothing was exact. Every detail had been altered, rebuilt, made uniform, stripped of character. It was as though the world we knew had been torn down and redrawn with a ruler. Sarah pressed her hand to a crumbling wall, whispering, This is from our time." Mark shook his head. "Not anymore." We turned a corner and froze. Above us, shadows slid across the dome. At first they looked like whales, huge and graceful, gliding through the ocean. But their movements were too straight, too precise, their outlines too angular. These weren't creatures. These were machines. They drifted silently, massive submarines or something larger, their forms blotting out what little light filtered through the water. Every pass made the ground beneath us hum. "They're watching us," Mark muttered. We pressed deeper into the city. The silence of the people was unnerving. They didn't laugh, didn't argue, didn't acknowledge one another. It was as if they were all performing a play for an unseen audience, their lives synchronized into the same lifeless routine. And then we saw the first barrier, a street cut off by a metal gate. Signs plastered across it read, "Authorized personnel only. Entry forbidden." Behind the fence, faint light pulsed in rhythm, like the heartbeat of a giant machine. We heard the low hum of turbines and the grinding of gears. Something enormous was running just beyond sight. Sarah leaned closer, trying to peer through the slats. Her voice trembled. "What is this?" Mark reached to pull her back. "Whatever it is, it's not for us." That was when I noticed Daniel. He wasn't looking at the machine. He was staring at the cameras mounted above the gate, his jaw tight, eyes flickering with something unreadable. For a second, I thought he was afraid, but it didn't look like fear. It looked like recognition. "Daniel?" I asked quietly. He blinked, finally meeting my eyes, and forced a quick smile. "Nothing. Just nothing." He turned away before I could ask more. We kept walking. More fences, more signs. Whole blocks of the city locked away from the citizens, who never even glanced at them. Everyone pretended the barriers weren't there, but the sound behind them carried. The metallic roar of engines, the low vibration of massive power. "This isn't survival," I muttered. "This is containment." And as the shadows above shifted again, blotting out what little light we had, the truth sank deeper. We weren't guests here. We were prisoners. The city wasn't endless. Its polished streets, with their repeating patterns of sterile buildings, gave way to something different, a district that looked abandoned, as though the system maintaining the dome had simply given up here. Cracked pavement, flickering lights, a silence heavier than before. It was Sarah who pointed at the building first. "Look," she whispered. Ahead of us stood what looked like a museum. Its facade was fractured, its glass doors shattered long ago, but the word archive was still carved above the entrance. The letters were half buried under layers of dust and sea residue, as though no one had entered for decades. We hesitated, then stepped inside. The air was colder here. Our footsteps echoed unnaturally against marble floors. The walls were lined with glass cases, some empty, others filled with artifacts that looked both familiar and foreign. Rusted cars preserved like relics, old newspapers yellowed with age, photographs of cities half drowned in water, skyscrapers swallowed by waves. "This," Sarah's voice cracked. "This was our world." Mark leaned closer to one of the photographs. New York, its skyline submerged beneath a dark surge, only the tips of towers visible above the flood. Another showed Paris, the Eiffel Tower rising above an endless sea. It was undeniable. The Great Flood had happened, but then we noticed the absences. Entire exhibits stripped clean, plaques missing from their mounts, pages torn from preserved books. One display case still had shards of glass scattered inside it, as if whatever had been stored there was taken in a hurry. "This isn't history," Mark muttered. "It's censorship." We followed the main corridor deeper. At the end of the hall stood a massive mural, a timeline, painted across the wall. It depicted rising oceans, collapsing cities, desperate humanity building domes beneath the waves. But then, the timeline broke. Gaps. Whole decades painted over with crude gray strokes, as if erasing events too dangerous to be remembered. And that was when we saw the symbol. A circle, intersected by jagged lines like chains. It was small, painted near the bottom corner of the mural, easy to overlook. But Daniel stopped dead in front of it. His breathing quickened, his hand almost reaching toward it before he pulled back. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing," he muttered too quickly. "Just graffiti." But his eyes lingered on the mark long after we turned away. At the center of the museum stood a cracked display screen, miraculously still powered. Static flickered across it, then brief flashes of images, maps of coastlines shrinking, stock market numbers collapsing, corporate logos stamped over images of cities drowning. Sarah gasped. It wasn't nature. She was right. The data, broken though it was, showed deliberate manipulation. Dams destroyed, coastlines detonated, entire regions erased not by waves, but by force. "This was engineered," Mark whispered. "Someone sank the world." We stood there, silent, the weight of it pressing down. And in that silence, I noticed Daniel again. He wasn't shocked like us. He wasn't horrified. He was calm, too calm. And for the first time, the thought crossed my mind. Maybe one of us already knew the truth. The farther we walked, the quieter the city became. The repeating blocks of gray towers faded, and the polished streets gave way to broken pavement and rusting metal. At last, we reached the place where the dome ended, the border between the known and the unspoken. Through the translucent wall, the ocean loomed. It was not calm like the sea we once knew, but heavy, alive with debris and ruins, suspended in the dark. The light that filtered through the water was faint, distorted, as though the entire world outside was being suffocated. We pressed our hands against the dome, staring. There, only a few hundred meters away, stood the skeletons of skyscrapers, their tops jagged, their windows broken, algae clinging to their steel frames. They hadn't been protected, hadn't been saved. They'd simply been left to drown. Sarah's breath caught. That's the city. Our city. And she was right. The skyline was familiar, but broken. Bridges bent at unnatural angles. Statues toppled. I even recognized what had once been a stadium, now a hollow shell. The seats filled with water, fish darting in and out of its shadows. Mark's voice was low. "This isn't just a natural disaster." He pointed toward a plane carcass resting on the seabed, its wings torn clean off, its hull blackened as though burned, not wrecked by waves, destroyed. "This looks like war." We fell silent, each of us feeling the weight of his words. But then something shifted above. A massive shadow passed over the dome. For a moment, we thought it was another one of those mechanical leviathans. But no, this was different. Its underside pulsed with lights, red and white, moving in careful patterns. It wasn't drifting. It was patrolling. Sarah grabbed my arm. "They're watching us." We backed away. But as we did, I noticed Daniel again. He wasn't scared. He wasn't shocked. He was staring straight at the patrol craft, his expression calm, almost expectant, like he'd been waiting for it. "Daniel," I said, but he didn't answer. Mark noticed too. "Why do you keep looking at them like that?" His voice was sharp. Daniel finally turned, his tone dismissive. "I'm just observing. Nothing more." But none of us believed him. As we moved back from the dome, the silence pressed tighter. The people of the city never came this far. It was clear why. The truth was written in ruins outside, visible for anyone brave enough to look. And in that moment, with the wreckage of the world so close, I realized the truth Sarah had been too afraid to say aloud. The floods weren't an accident. Someone drowned the world on purpose. We should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at us to stay within the safety of the main streets, where at least the silence of the citizens gave the illusion of order. But Mark had spotted something when we were near the outskirts, a rusted hatch in the ground, half hidden beneath debris. It was Sarah who knelt and brushed the dust away. The words stenciled across it were barely legible, but we could make them out. "Maintenance access. Restricted." Mark grinned despite the tension. "If the whole city's built on lies, then this is where the truth leaks through." With effort, we pulled the hatch open. The smell hit us first. Damp metal, rust, the acrid bite of something chemical. We climbed down into darkness, our footsteps echoing against steel. The tunnel stretched ahead, lined with corroded pipes and thick cables that pulsed faintly with light. Some bore faded corporate logos we recognized, brands from our own time, corporations we thought had long disappeared. Sarah ran her fingers over one. How are these still here?" "They didn't disappear," Mark said grimly. "They built this." We pressed on, along the walls, warning signs repeated in a dozen languages. "Do not exit. Survival depends on containment." But the phrasing was wrong. It wasn't about keeping something out. It was about keeping people in. "This isn't protection," Sarah whispered. "It's control." And then we found the proof. At the far end of the corridor stood a locked door, its surface covered in peeling paint. Through a crack, we saw stacks of old documents, monitors still glowing dimly, and a wall covered with maps, the kind you'd see in war rooms. On them, coastlines were crossed out with red, entire continents shaded in black. Not predictions. Plans. Someone had mapped the drowning of the world before it happened. Mark stepped back, shaking his head. They did it on purpose. They knew exactly what they were sacrificing. The room beyond the door hummed with hidden power, turbines still running after who knows how many decades. That was when Sarah froze. "Listen," we did. Footsteps. Not ours. Heavy, deliberate, coming closer down the tunnel. We exchanged looks of panic. Whoever lived in this city, they didn't want us here. Daniel, however, didn't look surprised. His face was calm, unreadable, almost resigned. "Don't panic," he said softly. "If they find us, we can explain." Mark rounded on him. "Explain what, Daniel? That we stumbled on proof the whole damn world was sunk like a chess move?" Daniel's jaw tightened. For a second, I thought he would snap back, but instead he just said, "Maybe some truths aren't meant to be known." The footsteps grew louder. We scrambled, pulling the hatch closed behind us as we climbed back into the city. My heart hammered in my chest. It was clear now. We weren't just intruding. We were being hunted. And somewhere deep down, I realized, someone in our group wasn't afraid of being caught. We thought we'd escaped by crawling out of the maintenance hatch, but the city had already marked us. The moment we emerged, alarms echoed faintly through the streets. Not blaring, but sharp, cold tones that seemed to vibrate through the concrete. The silent citizens suddenly froze, their heads tilting slightly, as if some invisible signal had reached them. Then, as one, they stepped aside, clearing the streets like performers obeying a stage cue. And that was when we saw them. Figures in black uniforms, masks covering their faces, moving with mechanical precision. They weren't police, not soldiers, something else. Their eyes glowed faintly behind their masks, scanning every corner. They moved toward us without hesitation. "Run!" Mark shouted, and we did. The streets blurred. We ducked into alleys, pushed through doors, our lungs burning with every step. Behind us, the heavy footsteps never faltered. These weren't men chasing us. They were predators following a signal. Sarah stumbled, and I pulled her up. "This way!" We tore through what looked like an abandoned shopping arcade, the old signs above us hanging by broken wires. A neon board sparked as we ran under it, showering us with flickers of blue light. Mark grabbed a metal bar and shoved it through the handles of a door behind us, blocking it. The pounding that followed shook the glass. "What do they want with us?" Sarah gasped. Mark's answer was harsh. Same thing they wanted with the rest of the world. Silence. I turned to Daniel, who was breathing hard, but still strangely calm. Too calm. His eyes weren't on us. They were darting upward, scanning the cameras that tracked our every move. "Why are you looking at them?" I demanded. He shook his head. "Because they're not chasing us blindly. They know exactly where we'll go next." His words made my blood run cold. The pounding grew louder. We pushed through another hallway, bursting out into the open plaza near the edge of the dome. From here, the ocean above pressed down like a sky made of glass, distorted shadows drifting in the deep. That was when the patrol craft appeared again, sliding across the dome's surface. Its lights pulsed red, then white, then red again. A signal. Mark swore under his breath. "They're calling in more." The enforcers closed in from every direction. We ran, feet slamming against the cold stone, but I could feel the circle tightening. They weren't just chasing us, they were guiding us, hurting us. Sarah grabbed my arm, her voice breaking. "Why us? Why now?" And I had no answer. We skidded into another narrow street. Ahead, another gate loomed. Restricted access again. Without thinking, Mark pulled at the lock, trying to break it open. Behind us, Daniel spoke in a voice too steady for the chaos around us. "Stop!" We turned, breathless, staring at him. The enforcers were closing in, but Daniel wasn't panicking. He was standing straight, calm, his eyes flickering with something I didn't want to believe. "Daniel," Sarah whispered. But before he could answer, the sound of boots hammered closer. There was no time left to ask questions. We forced the gate open, slipping inside just as the masked figures reached the plaza. The door clanged shut behind us, locking them out, for now. We collapsed against the wall, our chests heaving, the cold sweat on our skin mixing with fear. But even as I tried to catch my breath, my eyes stayed on Daniel. His expression wasn't relief, it was something else, something darker. And in that silence, one thought screamed louder than any alarm. We weren't just running from the city. We were running from someone among us. We staggered through the gate and into another tunnel. The air here was colder, heavy with the smell of salt and oil. Our footsteps echoed in the silence as we pushed forward, deeper into the dark. Sarah clutched my arm, whispering between gasps, "We can't. Keep running forever." Mark shook his head. "We're not running. We're looking for a way out." But the words rang hollow. There was no out here, only more walls, more layers of control. The tunnels branched like veins beneath the dome, carrying us into its hidden skeleton. At last, we reached a wide chamber. Monitors lined the walls. their screens cracked but still alive with flickering images. Maps of cities under domes, timelines of construction, surveillance feeds showing people in gray uniforms moving like ants across plazas. And then we saw something that froze us in place. On one screen was a live feed of us, the four of us, running through the tunnels only minutes before. Sarah stumbled back. They've been watching us the whole time. Mark's jaw clenched. Then how the hell are we still alive? That was when Daniel spoke. His voice was quiet, almost resigned. Because I didn't let them stop us. The silence that followed was sharper than any alarm. "What are you talking about?" I asked. He turned toward the screens. The glow lit his face, and for the first time he didn't try to hide what he felt. It wasn't fear. It was guilt. And something colder. "They knew about you the moment you appeared here," Daniel said. "This city isn't just surviving. It's regulating. Every move, every word, every thought monitored. You think you've been escaping? You've been walking the path they allowed." Sarah's voice cracked. "You knew? You knew, and you didn't say anything?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I was trying to protect you. If I told you, they would have shut us down immediately. I thought, maybe I could keep you alive." "By lying to us?" Mark snapped, his voice shaking with fury. "By leading us right into their traps?" Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. The look on his face said enough. We heard it then, the echo of boots again, closer this time. The enforcers had found us. Daniel stepped back toward the monitors. His hand brushed against a panel, and the lights above us flickered. Doors began to slide shut, cutting us off from escape routes. "You don't understand," he said. "This world can't survive the truth. If people knew what really happened, if they knew the oceans rose because someone made them rise, it would all collapse. Chaos, violence. We're all safer this way." Mark lunged forward, grabbing Daniel by the collar. "Safer? You sold us out!" Daniel didn't fight back. He just whispered, "I chose survival." The pounding grew louder. Sarah pulled me toward another exit, but the corridor ahead was already filling with shadows. The enforcers were here. I looked at Daniel one last time. His eyes were steady, his voice calm, as he said the words that cut deeper than any blade. "You were never meant to leave." The walls trembled as the first enforcer stepped into the chamber. We had seconds to decide: fight, run, or surrender. But as the screens flickered with images of drowned cities and broken histories, I realized the truth. The biggest threat wasn't outside. It was standing right beside us. The chamber shook as the enforcers closed in. Their boots struck the floor in perfect rhythm, masks glowing faintly with that lifeless red light. Sarah clutched my hand. Mark readied the metal bar he'd torn from the hatch, but we all knew it wouldn't be enough. These weren't men chasing us. They were machines of control, built to end resistance before it began. And Daniel stood between us and them. "Move," Mark growled, raising the bar. Daniel didn't. His face was pale but steady, his eyes locked on ours with a strange mixture of pity and resolve. "If you fight, you'll die. If you surrender, they might let you live. Just accept it. This is the world now." Sarah's voice cracked. "The world? You mean their world, not ours." "They built the domes to preserve life," Daniel snapped. "Do you think humanity could survive chaos, violence, endless war? This is order. It's the only way forward." Mark spat at his feet. "You sound just like them." The pounding grew louder. Enforcers filled the corridor, their shadows stretching long across the floor. The chamber lights flickered, reflecting off their masks like 1,000 empty eyes. We had seconds. Mark lunged. The metal bar cracked against the floor as Daniel dodged, shoving him back. They struggled, fists and fury colliding in the dim glow of the monitors. Daniel's voice broke through the noise, bitter and desperate. "You don't get it. I saved you as long as I could, but there's no escape." I grabbed Sarah and pulled her toward a side passage, but the wall slid shut in front of us. Daniel had locked them with the panel. He wasn't just betraying us, he was delivering us. The first enforcer stepped into the chamber. Its hand reached forward, fingers curling like claws, the faint hum of machinery filling the silence. Mark roared and swung again, smashing the monitor sparks across the wall. "We're not theirs to take!" For a heartbeat, Daniel hesitated. His eyes flickered. Guilt, conflict, something human struggling to resurface. But then the enforcers pressed forward, and his jaw hardened. He chose. "Stop fighting," he whispered. "You'll only make it worse." We didn't listen. Sarah ripped a broken pipe from the wall, swinging it wildly. I grabbed a shard of glass, my hands shaking. The chamber erupted into chaos. Sparks, shouts, the sound of metal striking metal. Through the blur, I saw Daniel step back, his face lit by the flickering monitors. He wasn't helping us. He wasn't stopping them. He was watching, choosing survival. His survival in it over ours. The last thing I remember before the world turned red was Sarah's voice, sharp and broken. "Traitor!" And then the enforcers surged. The chamber dissolved into noise, into light, into the suffocating weight of the ocean pressing down above us. When I woke again, I was alone. The domed city stretched silent around me. No Sarah, no Mark, no Daniel, just me, and the endless shadows of machines moving above the glass sky. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling my heart pound in terror and ache, and I knew then, this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of a war no one in this city wanted to admit was coming. Because if they drowned the world once, what's stopping them from doing it again?